That's actually pretty good. Like, it's not stupid low in the front. Oh my God, the best setup was actually the stock setup, blah, 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 all that, whatever. Holy hell. This is gonna get low, I can already tell you that. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Tim and today we'll be comparing lowering springs for the E46. What is the best lowering springs? How much do they actually lower the car? How do they affect the handling? Everything regarding lowering springs. I have these Eibach lowering springs. I also have H&R lowering springs, TA Technix lowering springs. How will they compare at half the price? And it wouldn't really be a good comparison of lowering springs if we didn't have the factory option as well. So that's what we have here. And to be able to test out the stock option, we also have some stock shocks as well. What we're gonna do is take the stock springs, mate them to the stock shocks, do a comparison of actual ride height against all the others and how they handle. This here isn't really the recommended method by BMW, but it does work. There, now that one is tightened. Here we have the final result. A good thing about the Bilstein B4s is you can't really install them wrong. They can't turn in the hub down here, which means you don't have to align them carefully. You just kind of slap them in and tighten the bolt. The rear springs here are by far the easiest to install. We'll just turn it so this one faces outwards, and then we can push it in. Alrighty, that means we're ready to install the wheels and see how the car sits. Super exciting, honestly. Holy hell, it looks like it's on stilts. This wheel gap here will obviously decrease as the car starts rolling, but already now it's looking... Let's drive it outside and see what it looks like. Without having driven the car, this is how it sits. I really hope this drops a little after I've driven it. Bump coming up. There's definitely comfort in it. It rides really well, honestly. I'll need to find somewhere to push it a little bit. This is actually plenty capable. There is though a tiny bit of body roll, but nothing crazy at all. Oh, I'm really hoping the height is something that I find good looking, because this is a great drive. Let's go home and see what is the actual ride height though. Now there's only one correct way of measuring ride height according to BMW, and that is to measure from the bottom of the rim in the middle and to the lower part of the highest point of the inner fender. In this case here, it's 58, almost 61. It also honestly does look like it's a bit too high. You know what, let's drive it outside and have a look again. Now, if the front had just been maybe 2 centimeters lower, it just doesn't look as good. Also, I have a Facebook group, so if you want to share your build, your projects, or you just want some sneak peeks into what I'm messing with here in this garage here, well, you can find the link in the description of my channel. Back from a drive, and honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed in myself. I did order these springs here as coupe springs or 330 CI springs. I don't know if it's from a convertible. I don't know if it's from an automatic or manual car. And I don't know if it's even the sports springs, meaning that you could actually order a coupe with stock suspension. And this is maybe the most important lesson of this video here. If you don't know exactly where they came from, don't buy them, because it's a hot mess trying to find out what springs were fitted on which cars. But it sits way too high in my taste, and it sits higher than sports suspension should sit at. And here's the kicker. I installed E90 top mounts for an OEM Plus upgrade. The E90 mounts here, they drop it a further 8 millimeters to a centimeter or so. E90 325 IX, it has to be IX top mounts. So I installed them because I thought that with the stock sport height and then just adding 8 millimeters or 1 centimeter lowering, it would have it at somewhat perfect ride height, front and rear. And I'd be able to kind of, once the video was over, say, oh my God, the best setup was actually the stock setup, blah, 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 all that, whatever. It didn't happen, obviously. Either way, this setup here, I do rate it pretty high in terms of comfort. It's super enjoyable to drive around. They are softer, meaning more comfort and less handling. And looks-wise, well, I didn't even give it a rating because bad. Looks bad, honestly. That's it. With all that being said, let's go ahead and install the HR option. That should be the lowest option, and it should be the harshest option, but will also handle better than the others. And how will it, most importantly, how would it look? The factory spring I had installed versus the so-called lowering spring of the H&R. There. And here you can see the visual differences between the two. Even with the drop mount, this one is a bit longer. These are honestly a lot easier to install than the B4s, being they're so much shorter. This now aligned in the hub. We can go ahead and tighten it down. Now it gets really interesting because I already fucked up with the stock springs, which turned out to be maybe just standard springs, who knows, but now we have what I believe is the lowest and roughest lowering springs installed. Let's see. Holy hell. Notice how with the stock springs it was a lot higher than here, and this car hasn't been driven yet, so this is gonna get low. I can already tell you that. Nice. Let's drive it outside, see how it looks. Whoa, shit. It does sit pretty low, but let's take it for a spin, see how it goes. First speed bump coming up. Honestly, I thought they would be a lot harsher than this. Seems to corner a little bit flatter than the stock springs, that's for sure. Yeah, body roll has been reduced. I guess what will come down to is how low is it? And I know the guy I bought them from, he uninstalled them because he was running a 18 and 19 inch setup and he would sometimes bottom out. So now comes the interesting part. How high does it actually sit? Lower part of the inner fender, 57 versus 56.8. And now for the H&R springs, which come in at around $250. Now, if you were to pair them with the Bilstein B8s like I did, it would obviously be a different price. We're comparing springs here, so that's our main focus. And for that, the lowering here, 57 centimeters in the front, or what is equivalent to 22.4 inches, and that goes for the rear as well. They are a little bit different side to side, but the springs aren't new anymore, and it's tolerable by BMW to have up to 1 centimeter difference from side to side. Comfort, harder or a lot rougher, if you will, than the stock option. And that translates into, at least it feels like, better handling. They're a bit more confidence inspiring going into the corners, mainly because there's just a lot less body roll really, or it's at least noticeable. And then for looks, I gave it a 9 out of 10. And for it to be a 10 out of 10, if the rear had just been a little bit higher, maybe 1 centimeter, and would have that more raked look, then for me it would have been a 10 out of 10. Now, before we move on with the next springs here, I thought I'd just ask you for the next video. I'm considering doing a cheap mods, so to say, where we install various different types of intakes, including the Swiss cheese mod here. Obviously the cone filter, just a panel filter. There won't be any performance difference between them, but install them, find out what do they sound like. Also, I have some stainless steel braided brake hose that we can test. Do they offer any benefit over the OE rubber hoses? Some better lighting here we can test as well, and do these cross braces here have any effect on the handling? It's either that or we start detailing this extremely dirty car. And for that we also have a small task of, I hope this camera picks it up, a dent here. Let's go ahead and install the next one, the TA Technix, the budget version. And we'll start with the rear ones. Now we still need to unbolt right here because that leaves us room to swap in and out the springs. There. Then install the pad on this one here. Fish it in there. There. Good. And then just give it good and tight. There. Good. Initial impression, not bad. Let's roll it outside. That's actually pretty good. Like, it's not stupid low in the front. Add the IX drop mounts to this and it'll be just about perfect. Let's take it for a spin. I have a feeling this is gonna be good. Bump coming up. Not bad. Definitely less body roll than the OEM. Yeah, plenty capable. Bump. Works just fine, really. I'm honestly impressed. Let's go home and measure the rear ride height. To me, this is pretty much the perfect stance. Just a tiny bit lower in the front than the back. 57, 58. Good. What I haven't told you is they're actually not for a coupe. With all the other spring combinations I've tried so far, having the rear set lower than the front, I found these TA Technix springs used from a touring car, 6-cylinder touring or 4-cylinder diesel touring. And I ordered them because tourings tend to have a little bit stiffer springs in the rear because they weigh a bit more and they're supposed to carry a bigger load. So I went ahead and bought them because, yeah, they were used and cheap, and I thought it would be a good comparison. But the thing is, you can still use them on a coupe, as I've just shown you, and they're definitely the cheapest springs out there. Also, obviously, they're new. But looks-wise, because they're from a touring and have the rear setting just a little bit higher, they also have, in my opinion, a 10 out of 10 looks. It's the exact right look, with the rear just a tad bit higher than the front. Handling, well, they probably don't handle quite as well as the H&Rs, because the H&Rs are just a tiny bit stiffer, which translates into even less body roll than the TA Technix. But they're not bad at all, and they definitely have less body roll and more handling capabilities, or that's at least how it feels, than the OE springs, for instance. Comfort-wise, though, the OE springs still win, but the TA Technix, though, are just a little bit better than the H&Rs as well. These TA Technix springs here have surprised me very positively. We could actually go ahead and order the accompanying shocks or struts for these springs here and test them out against the Bilstein B12 package. And we even have the stock setup to test them out against. So let me know if you'd like to see such a comparison, and then maybe I could just buy these shocks here, and then we'd do a stock versus budget versus Bilstein B12. With all this being said here, let's just go ahead and install the Eibach springs, and then hopefully we will have a better picture as to, is there a better lowering spring, or is it just a matter of really picking what ride height you want, so to say. Let's install them. There. And that means we're ready for a test drive. Exciting. Hasn't driven yet. Having tested out all the 3 other options, it's gonna be fun to see what's it like being back in the Eibachs, because these here I have been driving for quite some time. Bump coming up. There's a tiny bit more body roll than the H&Rs, I think, but less than the OE springs. But it still goes very flat into the corners though. Alright, let's go home and take a look at how it actually sits though, and what is the ride height really. This sits about perfect. $58. Okay, so back from testing the Eibach Pro Kit. Well, comfort, I'd place it a 7 out of 10. It's not quite as comfortable as the OE, but it's still more comfortable than the H&Rs. And handling wise, a little better handling than the OE, but a little less than the H&Rs again. And looks for me an 8 out of 10. I do like the way it sits at 58 in the front and 57.5 in the rear. It looks like it's level, and that's fine. Again, I like them to have a little bit of forward rake or lean. And in that regard, again, it's just the TA techniques that meet this here. They are the ones that offer the least amount of lowering. In general, the H&Rs are slightly more expensive, but these here are certainly also an expensive option, at least compared to the TA techniques. As for a conclusion on what spring is best, well, the shocking truth is really that when it comes to lowering springs, none of it actually really matters that much, except for how much lower do they get. In terms of handling and comfort, it's pretty much the same, honestly. And I know I've given them various scores because there is a difference between the roughest H&Rs and the OE springs, but it honestly not as much as you'd think. The shocking truth is that there are far more important things to look at when it comes to handling and ride comfort, and that is the actual shocks and the wheel setup you're running. I've tested out 17, 18 and 19 inch wheels, and there's a big difference in how they drive and how they handle. Also, when it comes to shocks, there's a huge difference. Again, I've tested budget ones, I've tested the B14s and the B8s. I've even been driving on some shitty coilover. Even stuff like shitty tires versus good tires have a huge effect on these cars here. So keep that in mind when you order lowering springs. There's only really one thing you should consider when it comes to lowering springs, and that is how much do they actually lower the car. Anyways, that's it for this video. A big thank you for watching, and if you found this video helpful or interesting, please consider liking or subscribing. Bye. Oh, and by the way, I did actually manage to find a set of stock sports springs here. Even still, it actually sits too high in my opinion now, at least when I have the others to compare against. Well, I much prefer the even lower look than this. So being that most of them are actually not that different in terms of comfort and handling, well, it further proves the point that you should really just go ahead and buy the ones that offer the lowering you want. I will say this though, if you're looking for something that performs really well for a very low price though, the sports springs with mtech shocks, be it Bilstein, Sachs or whatever, they do perform really, really good.